This is the human brain, the most complex organ in the known universe. Here it is seen from the front. And this is the view from the back. At the lowest end is the brainstem, extending also into the spinal cord. Behind the brainstem, and in fact part of it, is the cerebellum, also known as the small brain. Now let's take a look inside. Here we see a number of complex structures that are all natural upward extensions from the brainstem. Most of these complex structures collectively form the limbic system, also called the emotional system. Situated on top of the brainstem is the hypothalamus, a structure connected to the pituitary gland through a little stalk, visible here. We'll go through each of these structures as we journey towards the more sophisticated part of the brain, known as the neocortex. Here we find the long-term memory sites towards the back, with the innovative and problem-solving prefrontal cortex towards the front. Effectively, the prefrontal cortex draws knowledge from the back of the brain and builds scenarios that might become useful as solutions for any given problem. Let's look at the brainstem in more detail. It consists of three parts: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. It is about as thick as your thumb and forms the natural upward extension of the spinal cord. It is highly complex and deals with challenges to our survival using vastly unconscious and reflexive processes. This is where life is sustained at a very basic level. The brainstem regulates breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, hunger and thirst, sleep and wake cycles, and arousal. It performs all of these functions in close cooperation with the hypothalamus. Essentially, the hypothalamus can be viewed as the youngest part of the brainstem and the oldest part of the next system, the limbic or emotional system. You cannot survive without a functional brainstem, but it's also no surprise that our vital life functions form the foundation of brain performance. The rest of the brain can be viewed as layers that build on top of the brainstem in an increasingly sophisticated way, until they reach the most sophisticated part of all, the prefrontal cortex. Now let's consider the hypothalamus. This small structure is almost in the center of the brain and in many ways plays a central role in keeping our minds and bodies happy. It does this continuously through day and night, receiving information from the outside and aligning the body with each piece of data. It looks into the body to ensure that we remain in a relaxed physiological state when there are no immediately perceived threats. It also activates both brain and body in response to threats or rewards, generating an acute stress response, essential for optimal brain performance. Once a threat or reward is no longer present, the hypothalamus moves us back into a relaxed physiological state, ready for the next challenge. In this way, the hypothalamus can be viewed as the eye turned inward. Note also the brainstem and hypothalamus respond to rhythms and cycles of breathing, heart rate, hunger and thirst, sleep and wake. This is because all life is rhythmical, from the natural cycles of the universe to the breaths we take each day. These are the amygdalas. We have two, one on each side. Place your index fingers on your temples. If you can imagine a line running from finger to finger, it may well run through both amygdalas. They look a bit like almonds. Amygdala is in fact Latin for almond. Where the hypothalamus is the eye turned inward, the amygdala is the eye turned outward. Every cue coming into your brain through the various senses, conscious and unconscious, is screened by the amygdala. And it asks this important question: how emotionally significant is this for my survival? In other words, it uses emotive and other memory cues to decide whether any newly arrived situation is safe for survival. In doing this, it unconsciously assigns a value to each sensory cue. The amygdala is richly connected with progressively sophisticated structures and can therefore ask the same questions of sensory cues in increasingly sophisticated ways. It goes something like this: will this help me survive? Will this make me belong? Is this me? Will this give me meaning? And if these questions are not answered satisfactorily, the amygdala instructs the hypothalamus to activate a stress response to move us away from the condition. Why? Because we have to stick together to survive. And to stick together, we need to belong, have a place in the group, an identity within the group, and make a meaningful contribution to the group's survival needs. For the most accurate screening, the amygdala needs to be connected to the brain's large memory banks. It is through the memory of past experiences and continuous learning that the amygdala can identify what promotes our survival, what makes us belong, gives us identity, or a sense of meaning. The amygdala does this by connecting with these two P-shaped bags called the hippocampi. This is where memories are made. We have one hippocampus on each side of the brain. If you cut through it at right angles when viewed from the front, it looks like this, a bit like a seahorse, the meaning of hippocampus in Latin. It is probably the most metabolically active part of the brain. We know this is one area where brain cells can be born or die. When we learn and experience new things, the information is handled by the hippocampus and transferred to long-term memory sites in the brain to form long-term memories. This transfer of knowledge from the hippocampus to the long-term memory sites happens especially while we sleep. The hypothalamus, hippocampus, and amygdala are all richly connected. We call this connected network the gateway triad because it really seems to form a gateway in the brain. From the foundational brain system via the brainstem, the emotional system via the amygdala, and the planning and problem-solving system via the hippocampus. This is where they all converge and diverge. Knowledge laid down in the long-term memory sites serves as building blocks for problem-solving, creativity, and innovation. To achieve this, the brain makes use of a superhighway called the dorsolateral pathways. Stored knowledge is then used to construct realistic solutions along the dorsolateral pathways en route to the most sophisticated part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. It seems that creative problem-solving and planning is focused on a specific area in the prefrontal cortex called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. We will call this area the planning and problem-solving cortex. At the same time, another system ensures that we make decisions and create solutions that give us the best chance to survive and thrive. This is also the system that drives us to achieve the goals necessary for survival. It is called the emotional system. It starts in the amygdala and forms two pathways shown here, moving in the direction of the prefrontal cortex. As it moves higher up towards the prefrontal cortex, more sophisticated problems are screened for their significance to our survival, belonging, identity, and meaning. In the prefrontal cortex, in an area called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex or emotional cortex, the emotional decider drives and constrains possible solutions to problems to ensure they are adaptive for the group or the organization. As you can see, all these processes build from basic to the most sophisticated along a hypothetical axis. We call this axis the neural axis of creativity. This is what makes the human brain the most beautifully complex organ we know of, able to promote our survival, but also to create and innovate for the benefit of all.